Let me ask you. Well, first of all,
anything you want.
Yeah, let me step back because you have a reputation for being pretty candid, as does Bob Dole. Is one of the consequences of the modern media that we have fewer people who are outspoken? I mean, is that part of the price of the modern media and the way they cover politicians? I mean, everyone says we want authenticity. We want people to tell us what they really think. But then when they do it, you get these dust-ups turned into more than dust-ups. I mean,
well, I saw all that change. I was a state legislator for 13 years and then Senate for 18, so 31 years of this stuff. When I started, you'd meet the guy in Cheyenne from AP, the AP guy, great guy, Bob Learight. I'd like to, why don't we sit down and have dinner? I'd like to ask you what's going on, what bills you're interested in, so you go to dinner, have a couple of belts, and talk very openly. I got an education bill, I think it's a piece of crap. Got something here I think is very worthwhile. And at the end of the day, or a week later, you might read a report about, things, whether my name was attached to it or not, but that would be valid as to making the system roll along. Maybe in earthy ways, I would have said this is a piece of shit, which I've done before. So, suddenly then, I don't know what it was in the Wyoming legislature, but it began to change when I said to a trusted reporter, I said, this bill is bullshit. And the headline the next day is, Simpson says bill is bullshit, which is really, to me, was a total violation of where we had been before. It wasn't Learight, another guy. Then when I got here, remember the series of things that happened with Packwood, when he sat with that pal of his every morning, on Saturday morning, and they chatted about things, and then the guy ran a whole series. He did that with Stockman.
that's right.
But he did one with Packwood, too. Maybe he's a different guy, but here suddenly everything has shifted from confidential little sessions, could we just sit and visit, like with Bob Woodward. I've done those with Bob. And as far as I have observed, he's never dropped the harpoon in me, but there are people walking around looking like porcupines where old Bob has drifted the harpoon into them. And anyway, it all changed. And then out here, Jake Garn and I were separately interviewed. He with the Salt Lake Tribune, me with the New York Times. And I'd known this guy a long time, and I said, this bill is bullshit. And the headline was, Simpson says this bill is bullshit. And it was the same day that Garn had said that some bill, the Salt Lake Tribune, he said this bill is bullshit. And our mothers called us the same day. Said, we never learned that word here. That we don't want to ever hear it again. I said, Mom, Dad taught it to us. You didn't. And
Did you ever hear Bob Dole call a bill bullshit?
The what?
Did you ever hear Bob Dole call a bill bullshit?
No, that was the amazing thing about Bob Dole. I did the swearing for him. I was his assistant leader. I don't think he never judged people about profanity. There's a difference between obscenity and profanity. It's a thin line, but one you want to preserve if you're profane. He was a genial, gentle man. He'd had all the pain and anguish wrung out of him during his rehabilitation, where he knew that he wouldn't even be here if he were filled with bitterness or hate. And he didn't have any of that. He didn't have to launder any of that out. The rest of us all did. But I really, honestly, and I know that he's in frustration, some would say, damn it, or something, but I don't believe that I ever heard Bob say bullshit.
Yeah. And it's interesting.
Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. I think that's true. But your comment about his tolerance of others, because Al D'Amato needless to say.
He is a piece of work. He had a great friend. Now go ahead. What about
No, but I said he was very tolerant of tomato. Although I think he'd never heard anyone with quite such a rich vocabulary.
He outdid George Carlin.
He'd say, gee, good God almighty, Dole, what the hell?
He kept us going, and he was very loyal to Dole. He was always there for him.
What was it about Dole that inspired loyalty?
Well, to me, it was that he never kept score on a guy. There's some classic things come to my mind. They may not fit in the contextual of this, but you're going to slice it up anyway. Bob Smith ran Bob Smith went up to his state of New Hampshire to support Phil Graham against Bob Dole. That was that primary. And he really slung it around. I mean, Bob was a big, tough guy. And Graham was a tough guy, too, really tough. And I think Dole sometimes, if there was sometimes conflict, it would be with Phil maybe sometimes. Phil was very much his own guy, and he was cocky and very clever and a hell of a good legislator. Anyway, Smith laid himself on the line for Phil. Of course, Phil didn't get anywhere, and he handled it well with a lot of self-denigrating humor. And anyway, Smith came back, and we're back in business. And one day, he's sitting next to me, and he said, God, he said, I got a bill that I really need, but I'm afraid to go to Dole and ask him to pull it to the top of the stack or get it up where we can get at it and debate it. I said, why? Well, he said, Jesus, I worked hard for Phil. I said, Dole doesn't care about that crap. He doesn't keep score. He said, well, I'm really worried about it. In fact, I said, I'm not going to go to him for you. You go to him and just say, Bob, I want to talk to you about this bill. Yeah, you didn't have to apologize for what you did with Phil Graham. Bob wouldn't even think of, keeping that score. About a day later, old Smith came. He said, gee, his eyes were big. He said, I can't believe it. I went to see Dole, and I said, I got this bill, Bob. And Bob said, well, what is it? Tell me about it. He said, yeah, we'll get that up, sure. How you been? Did you have a good, it puzzled Bob, because perhaps he would have done that. Or so many would have, keeping score. I never saw Bob Dole keep score. That's why he was a good leader. You knew damn well that if you didn't stick with him, that he wouldn't next time say, I remember on that vote, I needed your vote and you weren't with me now. You want me to do something or give you some time to do this or get a bill and I can't do it. I never heard him use leverage on a person like that ever, which has really made him, people respect the coin of the Senate. The only currency is trust and respect. There is no other coinage. And once you violate that, you never forget the guy that did it to you. That doesn't mean you go keep score on him, but you just know that this is a guy you can't trust. And there was one guy, and I'll name nameless. Yep. And he'd say, "Go find out, Al, where the hell we are on this." So I'd have my little tab Y, N, and U. And I'd go up and say, "You with me?" Yes, and then no, and then this U, which meant undecided. And this one guy's watching me tab him up. And I had a series of those votes all listed. And he said, what's all that you there? I said, this is you. This is who you are, Mr. Undecided. You're a phantom, a sparrow fart in the midst of a windstorm around here. And you know nothing. We can't count on you. We can't rely on you. Oh, he said, that's not true. I said, well, here are the votes. And I mean, there was one time Dole had him 10 minutes before the vote. He said yes, he would. And he came in and voted no, and then, cocked his head and went out the door, and Dole went over and said, what are you doing? Well, I had to call him a constituent, and just, I knew then, right then, I couldn't. Bob said, do you ever do anything on your own? On your own volition, without pressure from somebody and some source or some group? Do you ever do that? That's the harshest I'd ever. But
What are the weapons that a majority or minority leader have? I mean, there's the legend of Lyndon Johnson, and clearly that Senate's long gone. The political culture is long gone. What carrots and what sticks
well, you
are
use,
available?
You use the word weapons. If you're a leader, you don't use weapons. You use implements. My dad was in the Senate when Lyndon was president, and he needed Dad's vote. Hell, there were only 33 Republicans in the Senate. Think about that. And Dad was supposed to be right of Goldwater, so he wasn't, but he was described that. But Lyndon called him in. He said, "Now, Millward, here, you're from Wyoming. It must be very arid out there, and probably just jackrabbits starving to death, carrying their own water, laughing, He said, I can give you a dam. I can give you a thing out there, something that would really be good for you, just for your little old vote." And Dad said, "I don't play that game." God, old Lyndon was just furious. And that was Lyndon. And that wasn't leadership. That was clubbing people to death. What did they call it? A bourbon and water and a twist of the arm was the Lyndon Johnson cocktail. Anyway, Dole, he knew what you were interested in, what you needed. But where he was particularly, was his leadership was when, I don't know when he slept, it was, he just, and all the crew, I was right across the hall from him where the media couldn't see when I snuck over there to do my business. It was right next to the rotunda. And then I'd go right across the hall into Sheila's office, Sheila Burke and Joyce and all the rest of them. And then right into Dole's office. I could get in there at any point. He said, "Just come in whenever you got something." He's visiting with people of affairs of state, and very respected majority leader of the Senate, and then a minority. Anyway, when he'd say, when you'd get a little message, "Hey, Dole would like 4 or 5 of you to meet in the office," you knew that it was time to get off your butt. There was something going on. He'd sit there. "Well, where are we with this thing here? You guys have been working on that now for a couple of weeks. Getting close or anything?" "Well, no, we're working on it." And he'd just keep pushing. He had an amazing persistence. Push, and you never knew. I mean, you could be at a cocktail party, or you could be on the floor between votes. He'd say, "How you doing on that?" And going like that. And you'd say, "Oh, well, we're working on it." So he never forgot. He could juggle all that. I never saw him carry notes around. But he never forgot the lay of the land. And his charm of leadership was persistence, trust, and integrity of his own extraordinary worth. But he just kept silently sometimes and pushing, but never getting in there and saying, "Look, I'm going to crack heads now unless you get this damn thing done." He just would say, "Well, I'm going to check back with you in a couple of days, see where you are on this." And he'd do that with Democrats and Republicans. And then, I don't know what George Mitchell shared with you, but I'm sure you could see a deep admiration that George had for Dole. And while he was doing his business with Mitchell and Byrd, I was doing my business with Cranston and my old pal from Kentucky. Sometimes things would break down between Dole and Mitchell, and then I'd go over to Cranston and say, he'd say, well, this isn't going anywhere because we know that Jesse's really messing around with us and going to blow something up. They were always talking about Jesse blowing something up, and we were always talking about somebody else on their side blowing something up. And I'd say, no, Al, here's the real story. The other is, Wendell Ford was the other one. He called me a big, skinny cowboy son of a bitch, and I called him the worst governor Kentucky had ever had. But anyway, we had a very nice relationship, Wendell and I, and Al Cranston. And we would, there weren't many times, but there's a reason for everything, and then there's a real reason. And in Washington, people hang up on, quote, the reason or the truth, and then there's the real reason or the real truth. And so I would just say, let me tell you what's happening. We got a guy in there, and I wouldn't use names, who's doing this. It ain't Jesse. And I tell you why he's doing it. Because your guy, Ted, stuck it in his ear about 2 years ago, and he never forgot it. And he's feeling very petty, and he's going to screw you. And at least then they'd go back to their leadership and say, this is not about some giant trick. It's about pettiness. But it's real stuff instead of hypothetical stuff. So we could always get through. And when Cranston went down in flames, that was very sad, because all he had done was what the rest of us had done, except none of us liked to raise money like Al did. He'd get on the phone, raise money all day in a separate place, like you couldn't do it, but forgot to tell his staff that 2 weeks before, he'd talked to this guy who dropped a cycle on him of $5,000 each election, forgot to tell them not to have him come in a week later on an appointment. And they tied it together. Cranston asked the guy for money. Now 3 weeks later, the guy comes in for a visit. And they said, this is just ghastly. And he was nearly in tears. He got up on the floor and said, all of you have done this. Except your staff told you. And he didn't blame his staff. He spent the whole, any free hour was spent, and getting it from Republicans. Well, enough of that. I won't romance.
Let me ask you, just to sort of get the calendar straight here. You came to the Senate when?
In 78.
Now, Dole had been here at that point close to a decade. Do you go to older members for guidance? Of course, your dad was in the Senate, so you were at an advantage, obviously, there.
Mm-hmm.
But how does it work in terms of newcomers being sort of assimilated into the institution?
It worked awfully well for our group because there were 20 of us. There were 20 brand new U.S. senators. A lot of us had been legislators, or a few of them. And there was a great bunch, 11 Republicans and 9 Democrats, and we were very close. We had meetings together for a month, for about a year. Every month we'd have a Democrat would pick the luncheon speaker, and then a Republican. We had United Auto Workers, Levin invited him, and Dave Broder I invited, and Nancy Kassebaum would invite, and Byrd and Baker actually gathered us together and said, what are you doing in those? We said, well, we get together and talk. And they said, about what? Well, about how to answer the mail, because none of us, had ever been faced with that. How to deal with the hounding constituents who were demanding everything. How to exist.
There's no class on how to be a senator.
No, and so and in the Senate were people like Jack Javits and Mark Hatfield and Abe Ribicoff. I'd heard of those people. Man, oh man, these were big time people, and so you looked up to them and learned from them and asked them questions. They loved that. And Howard Baker was just magnificent. And I never hesitated to ask questions and say, look, I'm not here as a Republican. I'm here as a person trying to do something for the U.S. It's a sick idea, I know, but it was trying to do something. And I remember Cranston was, here he said, watch out for Al, he's maybe a commie. That's what he is, of course. He's a nuclear-free American. God, Well, then I got to visit with Al, find out he's an old jock like I was, that he went to Germany and read the Mein Kampf in German, came back here, saw it on a newsstand. He didn't read it in German, but that version came back here and it was totally different. He said, you're not reading this guy. This Al Cranston was a patriot. He said, beware of Adolf Hitler. The Mein Kampf you're reading in the New York bookstore is not the one in Munich. And it wasn't. I mean, totally different, incendiary out there. And those were things he did, and I got to know him very well. And then I went to his staff. I said, look, I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. What the hell are you doing here? What am I supposed to be? I was the ranking member. Now imagine when the Republicans took over in '80, get this, I suddenly became the chair of Immigration Refugee Policy, Civilian Nuclear Regulation, and Veterans Affairs, and the three ranking members were Ted Kennedy, Al Cranston, and Gary Hart, all three running for president. And I went to each one of them and I said, look guys, you run for president, I'll chair the committee. I know it pains you because I've only been here 2 years and pisses you off, but it's just the way it is, just a sick shift of politics. And you run for president, I'll run the committee, and I won't try to embarrass you, and I don't want you to embarrass me. Well, I'll tell you, it worked, and we had trust, and never, not one of those three, and they all ran for president. The only testy time was Tip O'Neill I passed the immigration bill. Boy, I was the king of the beasts, it passed by 76-20 or something. And then just laid there in the house. And I shouldn't use names, but I will. Marty Tolchin became a very good friend of the New York Times, a lovely guy, a real journalist. One day he's out wandering around and he said, hey Simpson, do you know Tip O'Neill? I said, well, not very well. He said, your bill's over there, just roosting. And if Tip you knew that bill like you do without staff, he'd be impressed by that and he'd bring it up. I said, oh, thanks for the tip. Which you see is not supposed to, that would be an evil thing if that were reported, that a New York Times reporter told a sitting senator, you might want to move your bill by this. I suppose that would get everybody in trouble. Anyway, I called Tip and I said, I'm Al Simpson. I got a bill over there, immigration. Oh, geez, that's hot stuff. I said, well, I can tell you about it. It's a good bill. And yeah. So he said, well, come on over. Then I've got my friend Ari Weiss here, not his friend. You remember Ari Weiss was the Wizard of Oz. I mean, he was an amazing guy and very devout in his religion, because he when it came to those periods, he walked to his, I don't understand, although my brother is now one of the community, married into the community, our people, as he said, these are our people. And so anyway, Ari Weiss sat there. Tip said, you got any staff over here with you? I said, no. Well, what the hell's the bill about? And I'd say, it's what it does. He turned to Ari, he said, is that right? And he rolled up his sleeves with a cigar. I nearly choked. I used to smoke 3 packs a day. I thought, well, I'll suffer this one through. And at the end, he said, I'll be damned. He said, that sounds pretty good. It's going to be tough, though. There'll be a lot of controversy. I said, you're not kidding. And he then asked a lot more questions, and then Ari Weiss asked a lot of questions, and when he finished, Tip got right up in my face. He said, I want to tell you something. I'm going to bring that son of a bitch up before November 1st. But if you say anything to anybody, you'll never see it ever. again in your whole life. So I go back to my office. What did Tip say? I don't know. I said, God knows. Just hanging by a thread. Never even told my wife. 53 years this year. But she never asked much about, she just knew that I was having fun, and she was a great supporter, is a great supporter. Well, sure enough, late October, he pulls this thing up. Well, it's election is coming up. And Hart called him, and Mondale. This was before their primary. Anyway, I had to be, because both of them said, Jesus, what are you doing pulling up this unbelievable incendiary bomb while I'm out here in California working the Hispanic vote, and I'm down in Texas, and Mondale and Hart just assailed him in their own way. He said, well, I'll tell you what, guys, you run for president and I'll run the House. And I'm going to get Simpson's bill up there. Well, of course, they tore it, it got it going. It got the debate going. And then the next year we were able to pick up a lot of slack, but that was Tip. And he never violated. This was a handshake, and that's the way we did our business. I was at his going away party at the family table, for God's sake, and talked to him a couple of weeks before he died, and he said, God damn it, I'm falling apart. Just exactly what Thurgood Marshall said. You remember? They got him, how's your press conference? Thurgood said, I'm falling apart. And old Tip then was gone in a couple of weeks. Wonderful guy, but again, I was still in that aura of trust, and it was easy to do.
Is it still there?
I don't know.
Has it been lost?
Hell, don't ask me. I mean, if you read the paper all day, you'd say that there's nothing there. But yet, if you look at Kennedy and Enzi, now that Enzi took my place, and he and Ted are doing big-time legislation. They're doing OSHA stuff. They're doing health care. They're doing stuff on parity, mental health. You seen anything about that? Hell no.
That raises a question. Yeah, how much of it is distorted by media coverage or lack of coverage?
Well, they don't understand. They're looking for all the rage of something emotional, emotion, fear. Either pass or kill a bill with the use of emotion, fear, guilt, or racism. And I knew that because everything I dealt with was filled with emotion, fear, guilt, or racism. Immigration, nuclear high-level waste, Social Security, veterans benefits, Jesus, you name it. So every time people run out of facts on those issues, they repair to the lurking darkness of emotion, fear, guilt, and racism. So that was always the toughest part, and then the media will always just go for one of those. Somebody said, "Well, what will a good immigration bill look like?" I said, "Whoever crafts the finest immigration reform bill ever made will be called a bigot and a xenophobe and a racist. So, Merry Christmas. Whoever crafts the best high-level nuclear waste will be called a bomber of the ages, a destruction of the environment." This is the way it goes in the media. Well, look at it. I don't watch television. What the hell's there to watch? What kid got pulled out of a swamp, a video camera for 10 days in a row, some poor bastard that got jerked off the street and chopped in half. And, Gertrude Van Esterlin or whatever, just every night just straining milk to get the pathos and anguish. Oh, God, who cares?
Let me ask you, because in a curious way that brings up this, Dole's career, in so many ways, this is bizarre, not bizarre, but really the trajectory of Dole's career, over 40 years, the transformation of the media, from going around in small town newspapers in Kansas to dealing with really television's dominance, even into the internet age, and Jon Stewart and Saturday Night Live and all of that. And he seems to have sort of adapted as that culture underwent, a transformation. Can you explain that, or?
Well, I don't. I think he just always was who he was, and humor. And by the way, I've met that her name is not Gertrude Van Effen.
No.
But, she does what people like. They like to watch that, and she's a hell of an interviewer. So,
Yeah.
that's not I'm not the judge of that.
Right.
But Dole, all humor comes from pain. That's a very important thing to learn in life. Anyone that you have ever met with a delicious sense of humor has worked through tremendous pain to the degree of their own definition, not yours or mine. Groucho Marx. I talked to Danny Kaye one night. He said, Simpson, there's just a little Jewish kid on the streets of New York getting the crap kicked out of me every day by Irish guys and black guys, and I learned humor. And I had to save my life to get just getting kicked around. Groucho Marx, I never met him, but I sure met Kaye. Bob Hope, I met him and knew him and was going to do a shtick with him and didn't get that done. So humor, that was Bob Dole's stock in trade. So with humor, you can adapt to any kind of humor, but his humor was never, it could be biting, and but it was never intended to be biting. It's a very interesting point. But humor is the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. That was what my mother taught me. And so Bob was rich in that, and he could leaven any heavy situation with humor, prick the boil and lessen it.
Was he a populist? And the reason I ask that is people always understandably focus on the war years and see that as a transforming, defining part of making him who he was. And I've always thought that critical as it is, tends to overlook the experience of growing up dirt poor in the Depression in a small town in Kansas, and the Dust Bowl and all that, the stoicism and the humor.
Stoicism, yeah, you use that. That's very.
And I wonder if there's a little bit of the populist that he brought out of that experience. I mean, whether it's pricking the pomposity of Washington types, or talking about Gucci goats, the lobbyists lined up who, and looking out for people for whom there aren't lobbyists.
Well, I think the great plains of Kansas and open spaces produce people like that. Something about, I think if you just grow up in a bunch of trees on the East Coast, you don't see, you don't, if you step out into Kansas, I mean, there's a hill over there maybe that high, it's 400 yards away, and or you go to Wyoming and the Teton Mountains are soaring up 6,000 feet in front of your face. It puts things in perspective when you grow up and you're a kid and you think, Jesus, this is big. Bigger than big, and I think it gives you a better perspective. The heartland, a lot of presidents from the heartland, Ohio, and not to say the East and the West Coast aren't wonderful, experiences. Big Sur and Massachusetts and the Berkshires, all that. Well, enough of that. But to me, the saddest thing was, and I got in a lot of trouble. Not with anybody that loved him. We had a group called the Blackbeard Society. Remember during his campaign? Black Salt. Check that out. You want to? I didn't inform. Howard Baker, Black Salt. Cannon, Jim. Probably 15 guys, and we'd meet about the presidential campaign. How's it going? And he had a manager, and I must mention his name, I guess, Scott Reed. And I would sit there and I'd say, well, when are we going to see the real Bob Dole in this campaign? Well, you see, Simpson, you will see him, and, you remember that Mo Udall wrote a book, Too Funny to Be President. I said, yeah, and 200,000 more votes in 6 states, and he'd have beaten Jimmy Carter's ass. So I said, it ain't a bad thing to use, especially when a lot less people knew Mo than they knew Bob Dole. And Mo damn near won that primary. Dole, his being is humor, the core of his being. And this guy and the handlers were telling him not to use humor during the campaign. Well, you could see, this is my view, see in a minute he wasn't comfortable with that. And then when he tried to use it, it was almost like they'd visit with him at night and say, no, you made a joke there in Omaha, you can't. It was just like they'd shackled Simpson, at the temple.
In that campaign, the year before, the fall of '95, your point is so on target, but it went beyond that because I'd written speeches for him for years, and I had a sense, this wasn't Bob Dole, and he was trying to be something he wasn't, and I wrote him a memo, and no great shakes, but it talked about, you were a better candidate in '88 than you are this year, for a very simple reason, because you were yourself, and because authenticity is your strong suit. There's this kind of Truman-esque, plain-spoken, not eloquent, not polished, but honest, and the un-Clinton. That's your strong suit, and humor is part of it. And you're trying to be something that you're not, and you're not a very good actor, and you're feeding the crocodile, as Churchill said, with the religious right. All of these things, the speech in Hollywood attacking. It doesn't sound like Bob Dole. It was fascinating. I got a call from Time Magazine. They had a copy of the memo, and they had been with Dole, and he told them that he kept the memo on his desk and looked at it every day and sent it over to the campaign. Well, you can imagine how many friends, that made for me. And I found out later on, Dole would leak the memo because he wanted to send a message to people like you and governors and others that, hey, don't worry, I'm still me. I'm just doing what I have to do. But that was the '96 campaign. And he has said later on that '88 really was his year. That it was.
Well, it was my year too. He left me in charge of the Senate. I was the assistant leader, and he said, "Hey, Al," he came in. He said, "You got to run the shop there for about 18 weeks." I said, "Who, me?" Because I told him the glorious day when I'd just been here one term, and I was elected assistant majority leader of the Senate, and he was elected majority leader by 1 vote over Ted. Ted is still looking for the 3 people that he knows, one of the 3 that did this heinous deed, and I don't think he'll ever find them. But anyway, so I told Dole the first day, I said, I want you to know something. Really, you need to know. I don't want that job. I'd never take the job. I would never run for leader. And so you don't need to hear footprints mashing around behind you. Anyway, I laid it on Scott Reed. I said, you have taken my friend and taken the core of his being, and God, he got pissed. I said, stay pissed, pal, because you're leading him to defeat with whatever you're doing is not, it's disgusting to me. Well, I didn't know how many were listening to that, but when I came out, Sheila was standing behind the door, and she went, we've been trying to say that. Yeah. Anyway, I see Scott goes on. I wish him well. I see he's a wizard. He's giving advice, but he sure as hell gave my dear friend Bob Dole the bummest advice that's ever been given to a political candidate, and I've told him that to his face, and he was furious. And I said, stay furious. This is just bullshit. So anyway.
That sense so that the party, particularly, just single them out, particularly the religious right. That Dole felt he had to accommodate them. It wasn't very convincing. And the abortion issue, of course, I mean, and again, the media, if you listen to the media, you'd think that there was no other issue in America. And certainly at the Republican convention in '96, no one cared about anything except the abortion plague. And how did Dole deal with that?
As well as any presidential candidate could. That's my view. Would never be good enough for the purists. But you want to know that I have been pro-choice throughout my entire career and never shifted the position at all, and said that abortion is a deeply intimate and personal decision and it shouldn't even be part of the platform. And I never got a bit of flack from anybody in my party in the Senate. Nor did I ever serve with anybody from Wyoming, if you can believe this, that held my view, including Sullivan, a Democrat, Herschler, the governor, a Democrat, Wallop, Cheney, Thomas, and we never talked about it for 30 seconds because we respected each other. So although when they were pushing me as vice president under Bush, when he picked Quayle, 3 delegations said they'd walk out of New Orleans if I were the nominee, and I'd already told Bush, I said, don't put me up there. I've pissed off the veterans, I've pissed off the Social Security, the AARP is looking for me with hay hooks to drag me through the mud. They got the pike and my head on the gate outside. Well, he said, I suppose that's right. Anyway, back to what the hell we were talking about? Dole.
Well, yeah, in a larger sense, the party was transformed in those years. I mean, really from the late 70s on. I mean, obviously Ronald Reagan changed the party, and yet Reagan was taken to task by some for not being sufficiently pure.
That's right.
on a number of issues, including arms control.
Yeah.
Remember, he was going to give away the store to the Soviets and.
Well, Malcolm Wallop, my great dear colleague, was part of that. That we were being patsies. We were not strong. That is only one time I saw Dole. I can't remember, but Malcolm was on a roll. You heard this one? And we were at a caucus, and Malcolm was pushing, I think it was something in arms control, and Malcolm was Star Wars, and he had a staff that was tremendous, and he kept probing for something, I can't remember, and Malcolm could be very persistent. I'd known him since we were 17-year-old boys. He has Parkinson's now and some liver cancer, but he's doing fine, and I talked to him, but I don't remember what triggered it, but I do remember the response, and Bob said, if you don't like this, you run for leader. You be the leader, Malcolm. I'd never, and Malcolm, because of his deep respect for Dole, just stopped. Malcolm didn't say another word, but Dole fired on that one. The cylinder went off. He said, if you don't like the way I lead, you run for leader, or okay, you be the leader, whatever it was. It was pungent and swift. I saw him do that one other time when Lowell Weicker was picking on David Stockman. And Lowell was 6'7", weighed 230, and Stockman was 5'10", weighed 158. And Dole said, I don't want any more of that. And then I, to be the brutal struggler, I said, I tell you what, Lowell, I can see you'd like to pick old Stockman up and throw him like a javelin clear down toward the White House, but you're a bully. And old Weicker, God, I never get to, because he was big and a great guy. But anyway, those were those tension points you get to. Dole just, he had an equanimity that was envious to all, and that's what any leader has to have.
That's interesting because, of course, for a long time, as you know, the public perception was different. From the 60s and when he was the sheriff of the Senate and the ultimate Nixon loyalist and the Democrat wars line in '76. I mean, do you think he evolved with time? I mean, do you think he changed as he
What you adapt? What's the Marine Corps slogan? Adapt and improvise and come back. He could adapt to He could adapt to being in the minority. That was a tough adaptation. He had been in the majority. He'd been the majority leader, and then suddenly there's a new majority leader. You adapt.
There is a school of thought that the real kind of turning point was in '80 when you took the Senate, and all of a sudden he had an opportunity to demonstrate how responsible he could be. I mean, that, as he said, in the majority you don't just issue press releases. All of a sudden you're held accountable for achievement, for legislating. And that period in the Finance Committee was critical to the success of the Reagan presidency. And yet he was no supply-sider. How did that work out? How did he adapt to the new realities of Reagan's Washington, and particularly an economic theory that went against the grain?
First of all, when did Russell Long leave? Did Russell leave in '82? Because I think that was a key, because when Dole took over, he went to his first meeting and handed the gavel and said, now your turn, Mr. Chairman. And Long said, no, you're the chairman now. But his respect for Long, the two of them, I mean, so Long must have stayed then until at least '82. And so those were good years for Dole, that 2 years as leader and as the former kingpin of the Finance Committee, which he couldn't hold as leader. I don't know who did
I think Packwood moved
Packwood
up.
moved in '80 to chairman and Dole majority leader, but with Packwood and Long and Dole, I mean, you could get anything done. And that triumvirate.
How so?
Well, just because of their affection and regard for each other, and none of them sneaking stuff over on each other.
So what you're saying is the Senate, at least then, was still very much a personal institution.
Oh yeah, that's all it ever was. When I came to the Senate, I said to Strom.
You mentioned going to Strom when you...
Oh yeah, I went to Strom and he said, Helen, good to have you. I knew your father. Your father was a fine man of integrity and common sense, and joyful person. I enjoyed your dear father. And I said, well, he enjoyed you, Strom. He had seen Strom the day he jumped on that guy in the hall when he pinned Yarborough. My father's office was right there. He came out and Strom sitting on this guy. He said, now, Millard, you just get back. I'm handling this. I got everything handled here. Keeping him from making a quorum in there. You knew that story. Anyway, so anyway, I said, I want to be on the Judiciary Committee. I said, I chaired the Judiciary Committee in the Wyoming House, and I was assistant leader of the House and majority leader. And he said, I'll talk to my friend Ted. Ted was in the majority, and that'll taken care of. And so, and then Strom said, now, we have a good group of Republicans, except Matthias. We have to watch Matthias. And I said, watch who? He said, Mac Matthias, from Maryland. He never could track, Matthias, because he was a very progressive Republican, a marvelous man. Anyway, Ted came up, my dad had told me, he said, when you get to the Senate, get to enjoy Ted Kennedy. He was one ahead of Ted in seniority. Now imagine, 62, and Ted's still there. He said, because Ted caused his parents as much pain as you've caused your mother and I, and you'll enjoy each other. And we always have. So Ted put me on there, and I went to his staff, to a wonderful staff, Breyer, Steve Breyer on the Supreme Court, and Ken Feinberg, who did the settlement of the 9/11, and those guys. And I said, look, just tell me what's going on. I didn't come here to trick, just help me. You're professional staff, you're not just Democrats. That's the difference now. They've lost the thread of the professional staff there to help people on both sides. Now you don't help people with a D behind their name, or you don't help people with an R behind their name, you try to screw them. And the reason is because the staffs have lost all their professional flavor and are simply people who worked on the campaign beating the crap out of the guys on the other side, and they've never lost the bloodlust. And that's staff now, as I perceive them. In those days, staff was solid people. Dave Boyce, the great attorney, was on Ted's staff when I started. Anyway, that's, I digress.
How did Dole deal with both supply side economics and the supply siders? I mean,
He let them all in the door. That's what he did. That's how you deal with it. They come in and plead their case. Gun control, here I was, gun control in Wyoming is how steady you hold your rifle. There isn't anything to argue about. But, he'd bring in Baker, not Jim Baker, the man, dear Jim Brady. And his wife, they were there in Dole's office often during that debate on the Brady bill. And I tried to help them to a point. I said, there's a point I can't go past. But Dole, everybody had access to his chamber. So it didn't matter if it was Jeffrey Sachs or Harvey Moglantz. If they wanted to come in and talk, Dole would listen to them, and they'd leave knowing they had a hearing. They might not have known which way Dole was going. You don't have to tell that, but at some point, Dole never left anybody hanging. He would finally, before the moment of truth came, he'd say, look, I'm not with you on that. That's all you expect. Just tell me where the hell you are, instead of Mr. U for undecided. Those guys just drove you crazy.
But now in '82, of course, there's TEFRA, which is really an attempt to take back some of the ornaments that have been hung on the Christmas tree. And that would seem, it's a lot harder, I assume, passing a bill like that than it is passing a tax cut. Well,
again, he had people who were not out to make it tough on him as majority leader. Hines was helpful. When you lost Hines and Packwood on fiscal matters and health care, you lost some very bright people. But Packwood, no wonder Packwood and Dole, it was a very beautiful relationship, and Bob tried desperately to save him. And I remember sent John McCain and I to visit with Bob as to whether he should drop out. And without naming names, because some are still there, we cut a deal. I was there. It was about 2 a.m, and Packwood would resign, and he would have all of his benefits. He would have his pension, and his health care, and he would step down. Very painful for him, but only if we were to be certain that the leadership on the other side was not going to turn the entire file over to the Justice Department. And Packwood said, if that file is going to go forward to the Justice Department, I want to be in the U.S. Senate instead of a citizen, or I'm going to get it in the shorts. And the promise, and Dole looked right at the guy and said, are you going to turn that over to the Justice Department? Well, you don't know. You just don't. You don't. And Dole said, and then I lost my marbles. I said, God damn it, I want to know right now, are you going to do that? Because if you are, we're just going to hang with old Bob, and you can just keep shrieking into the night. And we really never got it done. But the next morning, they turned it over to the Justice Department, the Democrats. It was the seediest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And of course, then there was no charge. No charges came down from the federal government against Packwood, and I can't remember how long he held tough or whatever. It's clouded, but I remember what was clouded was my mind with rage. I nearly punched the guy out, and I said, you lying sack of crap. You were going to do that all the way. You've been negotiating all the time. You were going to stick it to Bob Packwood by turning that over, and you know damn well that they'd throw that out in a minute, but it would be a good headline. One more stab. I don't know what that had to do with anything, but Dole was so trying so hard and working so diligently and honestly to get that done in a way which was foiled by a vicious attitude.
How comfortable was he with Reagan? Republicanism, economics, Reagan himself?
We all loved Reagan. He told good jokes. Jokes that never got out into the public, And Dole would laugh at those, There were some bad ones, like the Lone Ranger and Tonto and bad things. And the guy selling firewood, oh, geez. And Dole would chuckle. And, of course, Reagan loved jokes. And he would occasionally call us over to the White House when she was down visiting her father in Scottsdale and say, just going to have a little stag here tonight and just tell stories. Not going to talk about anything. He'd have Howell Heflin and me and bumpers. It didn't matter. Just guys who loved stories. But I think he chuckled at Reagan. It was a gentle chuckling, like, how does this guy get away with that stuff? Because he did, and nobody ever went out in the street and said, why, the president just told the most offensive joke that I've ever heard. And we all just laughed with a kindly chuckle. Bird, I'll never forget Bird, he said, Alan, what did that story mean? What did he mean by that? I said, well, let me run through that. And Bird said, I don't tell dirty stories. It was a dirty story, wasn't it? I said, yeah, it was. Anyway, where were we?
But the party was moving, again, supply side economics was not the old religion. I mean, it was not the balanced budget. I mean, you sense with Dole, grounded in maybe his childhood, literally bred into him, was a conviction. It's almost a religious conviction that you don't spend more than you take in.
Yeah, but don't forget, Bob Dole was a legislator on a grand scale. And I always felt that I was a bit like that on a scale, because when it came down to Section 204D of the bill, they could give that to somebody else. And Dole, he could pick up a theme of anything. If you sat with him for 5 minutes or 3 on a bill, he would know what that bill did, and probably ramifications of it, and good and bad. But you weren't ever going to draw him down into, the difference between the word substantial versus excessive. And we'd send Danforth off to negotiate those. But Dole would say, hey, Jack, I got a real deal for you. Jack would say, God, what is it? Well, it's remember the tuna case up in Alaska where they were abusing the foreign workers, and there was a big... And Dole knew how to delegate. He knew every one of us what skills we had, and then he would pull the lever and send us forward to battle. I said, he's my captain. I'm his first lieutenant. I'd been in the Army. I'd go over the hill into any kind of flak for this guy. And under these circumstances, if he said, Al, I want you to go do this, I never hesitated. I'd go, Jesus, I got to visit with this guy. He's crapped all over you and me, and he doesn't do anything for the last. He said, I know, Al, but you're gonna go and give him the business. And I would go off into the war. But he knew how to get McClure. He knew how to get Democrat votes. He was a skillful.
How did he get elected? What do you think? Well, first of all, running for majority leader in '84. How do you run for majority leader? I mean, and it's legendary that people, do they lie to you? Do they change their mind after they tell you they're going to vote for you? I mean, how do you deal with that electorate?
Well, you do what Dole did. He knew the diversity of his crew, so he'd get old Alphonse in there and said, "Now, Alphonse, I need your help. Are you going to help me in my?" And old Al would say, "Oh yeah, hell, what the hell? We got to get that done. Well, I'd like you to visit with so and so and so and so." And then he'd call in Packwood, and he'd call in Hatfield. And so you had your little webs of deputies out there, getting votes. And anybody that said to you, "Well, that's great, we're just tickled to death, and good luck," just knock them off, just put them in a zero. You don't want anybody like that. But if they said, "How can I help? Who do you want me to talk to?" Man, then you know, and then you knew where the strength was coming. When I ran, they said, "Well, this is impossible. You've only been here one term." And hell, there were 5 guys. There was Gorton and Lugar and Caston. And I came off in the first ballot, and then the second, and then the third, and then beat Slade about 33 to 17 or 18. He came up and he said, "That's the first election I've ever lost." I said, "Well, first one I've ever won." He became a good, Slade Gorton, boy, there was a machine. He had a machine gun mind, and he knew, and Dole used him a lot. We both used him. You had such skillful people to use. Lugar, prince of a man, ran for president, never got anywhere. How sad that they didn't see the quality of him. Or Bill Bradley, sad you not see the quality of the man because of he didn't like to hold a fish up at the market at Seattle, and just dismissive or said something funny. I mean, you haven't got a prayer in that stuff. Anyway,
What about
where the hell were we?
Where did Helms fit in all of that?
Oh, Helms, he could handle Helms. Nobody else could. Nobody could handle Jesse. But Dole could handle him. And never in any harsh way say, "Jesse, now, we need this. And I know you feel very strongly. We're not going to bring up abortion every, 3 months. We're not going to do that. Maybe every year. We're not going to bring up prayer in schools every 3 months, maybe once a year. I know these are very important to you, but we're not going to do it every 3 or 4 months because it's destructive and disruptive." Well, then Dole would agree, but then the battalion of warriors over there in that hole where they met every Tuesday, what the hell is that guy's name? He was with, he injured himself severely in his back, they all met over there, they're still around. Part of the Abramoff crew, the one guy, the Taxpayers for America.
Grover Norquist.
What?
Grover Norquist.
Grover Norquist. He may be wearing orange pajamas someday soon. He was just savage. He cut me to bits, and Mazzoli, he passed out barcodes that you soaked in water and said, "Put this on your wrist. This is the Simpson Mazzoli ID, national ID." Anyway, Dole, they were furious at Dole. They said, "You're going to bring up these social issues. They mean something, and we have this base." And I remember one day Dole, in all calmness, said, "I hear you keep using this club over us here if we don't bring up this or that. I'm going to bring them up, but I'm not going to do it all the time." And by the way, if the, quote, base doesn't like it, who the hell are they going to vote for anyway? He didn't say who the hell, he'd just say, "Where do they go?" "Well, I'll tell you where they go. They go home." Well, so what? Then if they're that strong and deep believers and they go home, suck their thumbs just because they don't get their way, what can I do with people like that? He had a way of just packing the lunch, putting it right back on them, but when you get to supply side and all those things and the tax code and things, he knew the themes. He was the virtuoso of the theme. He was the conductor of the orchestra. He had a guy playing the oboe and another guy playing the strings, but he was the orchestral manager.
Why do you think that didn't translate into the presidential campaigns? That kind of thematic leadership? You know, the rap was, he'd been in the Senate so long, he spoke that language, you know, of appropriations and amendments, and, you know, you go outside the Beltway and it's almost like a foreign language.
It is. You can talk about legislation, and the media has already shaped the legislation. It's just like this immigration bill. This was an amnesty bill. It wasn't about amnesty, but it went down in flames because and my answer was, what the hell are you going to do with 12 million people? Just leave them here to be exploited? I mean, what the hell? Because they're going to be used, and they're abused, and they're illegal, and they're treated like crap. Anyway, I didn't answer your question, but got a lot off my chest there. Where the hell were we?
Why that? Maybe it's a larger question, because there is, you know, we don't elect legislators as a rule. Is there something almost disqualifying? There's almost this inverse relationship between the success a legislator has on Capitol Hill and the lack of success he has in running for president as it is evolved and defined today.
I think that's what you see. You know, look at Joe Biden and Chris Dodd. Those are a couple of sharp guys. I know them well, enjoyed them. And Joe Biden is probably the most remarkable foreign policy guy that ever stepped into the breach here. And it's too arcane for them. They don't understand that you've a partition of Iraq into 3 parts with an oil, you know, they're going, I know, you know, they're not getting it, which is too bad. Lugar had that marvelous ability to define, you know, about the nuclear aspects of we must freeze these around the world, Lugar none and all the rest. Bradley and his beautiful way of history and expression was determined by the general electorate as arcane. And
it doesn't fit into a soundbite.
No. I remember one time Clinton, I was still in the leadership, brought us in. He was going to talk about what he was going to say about Somalia and what would happen there. And there were about 10 of us, both parties. And he gave this pitch, lasted about a half hour. He said, that's what I'm going to say on national television next Tuesday. And he went around the room, he said, Simpson, and I enjoyed Clinton very much. His humor is impossible, which is good. And like Reagan's, very earthy, and he and Reagan much alike, you know, like schmoozers. If he walked in here right now, he'd charm everybody right out of the building. And he said, what did you think? You don't look, I said, look, it was great. But I'll tell you, if the guy on the bar stool in Buffalo, Wyoming can't understand that, what's the purpose of it? And they're never going to listen to 25 minutes of that. If you can't get that said in 7 or 8 minutes about Somalia, they don't care what you're going to do in Somalia. We said, thanks. Thanks a million now. I wish I hadn't called on you. I said, well, if you hadn't, I'd have thrown it in anyway. He gave a talk the next Tuesday, about 7 or 8 minutes, and I saw him a week later. He said, did the guy on the bar stool in Buffalo pick that up? I said, you ain't kidding. And that's the way it has to be, and Clinton could do that. He could take the arcane and get it into emotion. It's the economy, stupid. What the hell did you need anything more than that? And little phrases like that, no, you know, master.
How did Dole get along with Clinton?
Well, I think they enjoyed each other very much. And I think that came, you know, when they were invited there, and Dole got that first visit in the White House. He said, I wish what did he say? I've been looking forward to getting in there, but not in these circumstances. Anyway, I think they had a very good relationship because I sat with them, you know, for that. Well, when was Clinton? Clinton was elected in '92, so I had 4 years.
The government shutdown. The government shutdown.
Oh, jeez.
Must have driven Dole up the wall to be, in effect, held hostage by Newt and the bomb throwers in the House. I mean, what was that period like?
Let me tell you, that was, I think, Bob's greatest frustration and disappointment, because he was part of the Andrews Air Base crew that were putting together the package. And of course, everything was hanging with the horrible, sword of no, read my lips. And finally, Domenici and Dole and other thoughtful people on both sides of the aisle, both sides in the Senate, said, look, Bush is ready to crack a bit on that, and the reason is because we're going to get structural reform of the budget, 2-year budgeting or 4 instead of 2. We're going to get rid of this and that's the package. I mean, Dole would keep coming back to us, and there were guys in our party who said, I can't do that. This will be the end of us all. And Dole said, yeah, it will be the end of America if we don't get a handle on this damn budget. So Dole would come back, and he would express very carefully all the negotiations that were going on at Andrews. And finally he said, guys, I need your help. And the president needs your help, because if we can do this and do it in the House, we can blunt the business of no new taxes. We can blunt that. Well, I think that vote was 60-something, 63 or something to 30. And it went to the House. And if you really want to piss people off, which I do many occasions, go look at the roll call vote at the House. Well, they stuck it to George Bush. There were right-wing Republicans and left-wing Democrats that just punched his lights out, vote by vote. Newt Gingrich, Henry Waxman, Bam, all of them. Just, it's an amazing vote. I brought that up one night in front of the Heritage Society or something, and there was gagging and choking and puking and nausea. And I said, you can't come in here and say that. I said, I just did. Go look at the roll call vote and see who screwed George Bush and lost him the election. Democrats, easy. They loved it. Pete Stark, the rest of them were just grinning from ear to ear. Well, then they went back and did another package. And in the new package, we lost all the structural reform, all the new budgeting, all the stuff Domenici had fought for and Dole had fought for. That was the most frustrating. I never saw Dole, any more frustrated than that, to get the trust of the Senate and watch it go to the House and watch, Army and Newt and all the rest of these noble Republicans just killed the greatest structural reform we could have done in the budget. But I never saw Bob cry about it. He just couldn't understand it, and of course.
Did he understand Newt? That raises this logical question, because there clearly is this accelerating process where the party is moving further and further to the right, both socially, culturally, but also it's basically become the new orthodoxy that deficits don't matter.
Well, this Republican Party is going to get cremated on that one.
Yeah, I mean, how did Dole, on the personal level, what was the relationship with Gingrich?
I have no idea. I had, here when I was assistant majority leader, the new assistant majority leader of the House was Tom Foley. So I went right over. I said, hey, Tom, we could be king. He said, the country's in deep crap with you and me as assistant majority leaders. He a Democrat and me Republican. We had a wonderful friendship and worked together, met with each other. Well, then when Newt came in and we're assistant leaders, he said, we should get together. I said, great, we'll do it, once every couple of weeks. My office. I said, I'll come to your office first. Went over to his office on a Monday, I think, and he said, I read 4 books this weekend, and I think you would really be impressed, especially if you could give me your thoughts on this one. Well, I just stared at him. He said, this one book was really, and I'm thinking, how did I get in here? And finally, I said, well, let me look at that. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I hadn't gotten past page 142 of Lonesome Dove in 4 years. and yet I do keep up. So the next time he came to my office, and he said, I read 3 books this weekend. I think if you could just take a look at one, then maybe we could get a theme. And I thought, I mean, this is not my bag. I'm not into this. Finally, he said, you don't look enthused by this. He said, what did you do? Well, I said, I was in Wyoming all weekend. It takes me, got to go Denver, Dulles, and it's a huge state. But when I wasn't doing that, then one weekend he said, well, you were in Washington. I said, yeah. He said, what'd you do? Well, I said, I went to the Freer to see the new Whistler exhibit. I went over to the Smithsonian, to the American Arts. I love it in there. I mean, we were on a different planet. And
I could just imagine him doing that with Dole.
Well, see, I mean, you know what Dole would have done. He would have just kind of blinked or turned to the wall. But it was just nothing ran there.
The sequel, during the Clinton administration, when the government shuts down, and you and Dole, in effect, you're chained to the House position, whether you like it or not. I mean, what was that like?
Well, we just came to work, I think I did, and the tourists were all standing out there and things were closed, and I said, well, the House did this. They say, well, the bastards, I'm trying to get to see my kid see the Washington Monument, and they closed Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, and the governor said, how much will it cost you, Bruce Babbitt, to run the park for 2 or 3 weeks? Well, $200,000 or $300,000. He said, I've got the money. And Bruce said, well, I think we can work that out. And Bruce never called back. I told Bruce later, pal, I enjoyed working with you, but you never called back on that one, and that was a phony. And you let people know that. You don't say, I'm going to screw you the next time. You just let people know your disappointment. And that leads me to one that is very important to me, and it was stunning, Bob's reaction. When I took on the media out there, big blabbermouth, and came out of the White House, and all they were asking about was, the Iran-Contra and so on, and Dole said, you go handle it, I'm tired of these guys. Well, I was tired of them too, and I went out there and they asked, what about the president and Iran? I said, look, there's a hearing going on. It will be resolved. It's got good people on both sides of the aisle probing that. And I said, and the guy shoved this, recorder like that, and I bit it like a mouth organ, like that, which was not a good thing to do. And then I said, and then you keep asking these marvelous questions, and you stand out there whining, going, Mr. President, Mr. President. And I said, you're just trying to stick it in his gazoo, in his old gazoo. Well, they were stunned, They thought a kazoo was a musical instrument anyway, the dummies. And so then, of course, the paper the next day is this grotesque. My mother called, bad Time magazine. Diane Walker said, you know what I have on this film? I said, I can only guess. And there it was. Anyway, Dole was in Baltimore. A reporter came up to him and said, did you know what your assistant leader did over in Washington? Dole said, what did he do? And he gave him the phrase, and Dole said, as Dole would say, well, maybe he was thinking of the media, maybe he was trying to out-Agnew Agnew. Well, now that hurt me. I thought to myself, now I know Dole, and I trust him, but he didn't see that. I mean, the word Agnew is what got me out, but I understood it in the context of how Agnew hated the media, and that fitted, but the Agnew. I waited a day, and I said, Bob, I need to see you. And, yeah, Hal, pumping that old pencil, what's up, pal? I said, I saw your quote in the Baltimore Sun. I said, it never appeared in the Washington papers. And I just want to tell you, that really hurt me. He said, what? I said, the quote about Agnew, he said, what do you mean? I said, that hurt. I was pained by that. His jaw flopped down on his shirt. He said, I would never do that to you. I said, I know, but that's the way I read it. And it was painful for me. And I don't think anybody had ever done one of those, because his humor is not directed that way, but it can shear a person who's involved. And he got up. He said, I can't believe it. I said, I know, you don't have to believe it, but it did disappoint me and hurt. That's all I wanted to tell you. I love you, but that's it. Never, ever, ever again was there anything ever close to that when in our relationship. Because, and I think that there were people that had misread his humor, and they were out there. I think there were people who thought he tried to, and he would never have done it intentionally, but that it was left as a seed, Now Strom, he'd go to Strom, he'd say, Strom, I'm going to tell the fact that you knew Thomas Jefferson. So on Strom, oh, Bob, I love that. That'd be funny. That'd be a great story. I knew Thomas Jefferson, and he's a kind man. But I think that there was a time or two, not with me, because that resolved everything forever for us, because I love the guy. But I think there were people who thought, I didn't like that. And he would never have known it. And he would have never thought about it, more importantly, because it wouldn't have been in him to think that he had intended or ever intended to hurt anyone.
Did he discuss with you his decision to leave the Senate? Mm-hmm. Were you surprised when it...
No, you could see and then when he saw Trent Lott gearing up to go after me, and Trent had told me a dozen times, he said, I'm not interested in your job. I was fast asleep, Jesus. And then he geared up, and Dole could suddenly see that he was getting close. And Dole, unbeknownst to me, started to call guys in to the office to say, I shouldn't be in this race, but I am, and I want you to support Al. And that was pretty hazardous, because that got out of the room, Alphonse said, who do I have to kill, for Christ's sake, how do we get old Al in here? But there were others who then went back to the core of, his supporters, say, Dole is not helping you.
Was that ideological, generational, stylistic, personal? What were the factors at work there?
With me?
Yeah, that you would want. And what does that say about the Senate?
I was not forceful enough. I was not partisan enough. I was not carrying the agenda enough. I went over to, what's that guy's name? There's the office over there. He was with Gordon Al at the back end. The guy with glasses. He leads the charge over there. He was the messiah of that group. I told him I wouldn't bring those things up. I said, as the guy who controls, I'm the whip. I'm not going to bring him up. Oh, Jesus, he was so furious. And that remains so. But what was your question?
Well, in terms of the factors...
Well, I was too pleasant. I was, too easy. So obviously didn't have the fire. You got to have. These bastards are going to wipe out Democrats. We're here to wipe out Democrats. We're not here. And yet, I'll tell you, Trent has been through the fire, and I think he does a good job. But you have to go through the fire. And he went through the fire because when he got dinged, nobody was there for him. And if that had happened to Dole, it never would have. Nothing would have happened to Dole, because he had all the relationships of trust, even people that didn't agree with him. But I think with Trent, it was just Al's a great guy, but we need younger guys, and besides that, he's still goofy on abortion, don't forget. And he had waited until all of his pals got elected from the House. He was just scoring them up. Well, while I was dreaming for 10 years, he'd watch guy after guy come over from the House because they were so fed up over there in that slaughterhouse. And they'd come over, and old Trent, the first thing he'd say to him, and I asked Olympia Snow, I said, Olympia, I thought you'd help me. She said, I would do anything for you, but Trent Lott, when I came to the Senate, asked me if he ever ran for something, would I be there? Now so he laid his bridges, and he's good. And every time I come to Washington, especially after his crush, I pop in and see him, and I think he and Dole work together. Dole can work with anyone. And they said, well, Daschle, Dole outshined Daschle, and then poor Daschle was just a boy wandering around with the lions and got eaten by rats, and Dole was very careful there to be sure that he didn't, quote, outshine Tom Daschle. And they live right up here on the same floor, and they're great friends. So,
did you advise him? I mean, what was the point of leaving the Senate? Was it supposed to jumpstart the campaign? Was it supposed to, change the conversation? In '96. what was the reason? What was the rationale for Dole leaving? Was it just to concentrate on the campaign that he couldn't?
Oh yeah, he said I can't lead and do this, and he called us together, and then we all stood there when he did the full announcement. He just said I can't serve two masters. And I think I've done a good job as leader. Well, everybody clapped, even the Democrats. I mean, that was an amazing conference because Democrats and Republicans were there to say that Dole had been the fairest, most able leader that they'd served under. And I think then his disappointment there came with Jack Kemp, because Dole did for Ford what he was thinking Jack Kemp would do for him. And Jack Kemp, the first couple of weeks, really threw the bombs and was playing the Dole role with Ford. And then I think Kemp's staff got to him and said, hey, better cool it, because next time you'll be the candidate for President of the United States if you just stay out of this kind of dogfight business. That was tough for Bob and Elizabeth to watch that, because then the rest of the campaign, the debate of Al Gore and Jack Kemp would, you just grab your lunch, hope you could keep it down. Bad. And so then aside from the strictures on his humor and the inability of his vice presidential campaign to throw some lightning bolts where Bob couldn't because he had thrown enough in the previous combat, just must have been the most frustrating campaign ever known to man or woman.
What do you think he should be remembered for?
As one hell of a great guy, and not just a patriot, but a wondrous leader of America at a time when we thirsted for it, and he gave it. And he gave it in a way which pleased people. They were kind of honored to see this man who had persevered and was sitting in a darkened room for 110 days or 93, all dried up human being, just come out glowing like a light bulb and ready to throw himself into service for a country that he'd already thrown himself into service and given parts of his anatomy. So then he gave part of his soul, and that's the way he lived it. Yeah.
What kind of president do you think he would have been?
The what?
What kind of president do you think he would have been?
Oh, he'd been a lot of fun. He'd have gotten people in the room, and say, what the hell are you doing? He wouldn't have said that. He'd say, why are you doing that? He'd have gone to TIP. He'd have gone to their leadership. he could work with anybody, and he would say, why are we doing this? Why can't we pass this? What is the problem here? And then he'd have lieutenants, and he had plenty of those, Duberstein, I mean, and boy, he knew who to use, and he had good people around him. Sheila was awesome. So he would have kept things flowing. There wouldn't have been veto threats, and he'd had people, to think that this president never had Harry Reid told me, he said, never was in the White House for 4 years of this administration. You can't do that. Dole would have never done that. And it's unfortunate. And Dole was a facilitator. His job was to make things work. If they said, well, if you should talk to North Korea, he'd say, well, let's get started. Well, what about Iran and Syria? Well, start putting something together. Surely we can all agree that we shouldn't just sit over here and slaughter each other and kill babies and blow up marketplaces and weddings, for God's sake. And that's what he'd be doing. And in his own way, an inimitable way, with freedom to do it, where he would be able to use his humor unalloyed and untempered and just him. As Will Rogers said, and he's got to be the modern version. It would be, he said, it's great to be great, but it's greater to be human. That's
Not a bad epitaph.
Not a bad one. And the other one would be, you'd want him on your side. Because boy, when he was on your side, he was loyal. Didn't matter whether you crashed, didn't matter what happened to you, but his loyalty never left you, even when you had, quote, fallen from grace. I fell a few times from grace, and he never said a word, just always as supportive as can be. Well, you're on your own now.
That's great.
You'll have to...
That's great.